Hey there, I'm Coach Christa, and I'm going to show you how to sew a Cami Leotard. More than likely, you're coming from Etsy where you just bought my pattern, and now you're like, what the heck do I do now? Well, let me show you. Side note, if you still need the patterns, I'll put the link in the description. On to the first step. Ooh, this is exciting. We're going to go ahead and cut the big pieces first, and then the smaller ones next. Ooh, I just realized that my pattern is a full pattern, and yours is a half pattern, which means you need to cut on the fold. Don't forget. Now we're moving on to the binding, the straps, the binding strap pattern piece. First and foremost, this guy right here, he's going to be your best friend. And you'll find out here in just a second, but I need to explain one thing real quick. Yes, I did include the binding straps pattern piece. However, there's a much easier way with this guy, and so then you won't need that pattern piece. Okay, moving on. Now, grab your binding fabric, make sure that it's folded in half and the edge is straight and even. On your ruler, you want to find 1 inch and 3/8. Now take that measurement and put it on the edge of the fabric. That is how wide your binding is going to be. So then you're going to cut it, and watch when I cut, I hold the ruler, move it forward, cut, move it forward, and then this long piece will be more than enough that you need. And voila, you have your binding. Now that we have all our pattern pieces, it's time to start sewing. Don't get nervous, this is the fun part. Now I know that some of you may not have all of these machines, which is totally fine. So I will be showing different ways and explaining different ways throughout the video. On to step 2. We're gonna go ahead and put the front and the back together. Remember, right sides together. Here I'm going to show you a little pro tip, my little party trick. So instead of sewing completely off, you're going to stop a little bit after the side seam. Then you're going to put the crotch seam in and then keep sewing. How cool is that? It only took me a few years to figure that out. Don't worry, I'm not salty or anything. But wait, there's more. You take the other side seam, it'll be the bottom of the side seam, and then you lift it up and you keep sewing. And then you'll cut the strings and you're done with step 2. Step 3, elastic. The one thing I really love about camis is you only have to do elastic for the legs. For the width of the elastic, I'm using 5/8. As for the length, there's a couple ways you can measure. You can obviously use the length provided in my patterns, or you can measure the leg holes of your favorite leotard or a swim bottom. You could even measure a pair of underwear. Now that you have your elastic cut out, you have the option of sewing the ends together or not. I'm going to show you both ways. Make sure your home sewing machine is on zigzag and it's not on stretch. Ooh, that's me. I usually overlap the ends about 1/4 to 1/2 inch. Then I sew them together with the back stitch. And then just like the serger trick, you keep sewing. So put your needle down and then you're gonna put your next elastic in and keep sewing. Now, if you're feeling froggy and you wanna skip that step, which you can, here's what you're gonna do. You're gonna overlap them, pin it, and then when you sew it, you just have to put your needle down in between those two overlapped and then sew. But first, let me show you how to pin the elastic on the leg hole correctly. The goal of the elastic is to have the same stretch in the front and in the back. However, that makes it difficult because the front and the back are not the same measurements. So you just can't fold the elastic in half and then pin it to the side seam. It doesn't work like that. But that is my starting point. So I pinch the elastic where it's overlapping at the crotch, and then I fold the elastic in half to find the middle, and then I put it with the side seam. So that is the halfway. However, I put more elastic to the front because the front is longer. And then, as you can see here, I do the stretch test and make sure that there's the same amount of stretch in the back and in the front. This step is one of the harder steps, which is why I made a separate video going into further detail for those of you who need it. I'll put it on screen now and in the description. Now it's time to sew the elastic onto the leg hole. Make sure you start where the elastics overlap and then put your needle down. Because the elastic is smaller than the leg hole, we need to stretch it as we sew. You will stretch it out until the elastic is even with the fabric. Make sure you're not overstretching or understretching. Well, I guess it wouldn't be understretching, it would be not stretching enough. Once they're even, I pinch in the middle and then I take my left hand so it can be free and I can guide it through. I will also use my left thumb to adjust the fabric to be even with the elastic if it gets unaligned. And again, stretch, make sure the fabric and the elastic are even, pinch it, let go with your left hand, and then guide it through. Since I've been doing this for a while, it comes easier to me, so I don't know what's helpful or not helpful. I'm just going to show you me doing the entire other leg, but if you think you got it down, just move on to 5 minutes and 25 seconds. And here's what it looks like. Now it's time for top stitching. You can use your home sewing machine for this, just make sure that it's zigzag and it's not on stretch. Simply just fold it over and sew on top. Just make sure that the thread below is catching the elastic. I'm going to be using a cover stitch machine, but if you're using a home sewing machine, still watch this whole part because it's the same process, just a different machine. So for me, I no longer need to pin it because I'm just used to doing the steps. So feel free to fold it and pin it. Once you have your fabric under the foot, I like to put it right next to the last hole. When sewing, you're going to do kind of like the same technique as when we put the elastic on. Fold over the elastic, make sure it's a nice, crisp fold. And what I mean by that, well, it's really hard to explain, which is exactly why I'm making these videos because it's so much easier to show you. Okay, let's just slow it down. Fold over the elastic and then you're gonna pull it towards you so that it's nice and even and flat, but not too much. And then you can see with my left hand, I'm making sure that I'm pulling it towards the left so that it's nice and crisp. That's what I meant by crisp. It's a nice, crisp fold. Then you're going to start sewing, but when you're sewing, you are guiding with your left hand and your right hand through the machine. And I will say, if you're guiding too fast or you're lagging, it will cause these like diagonal ripples. However, don't get me wrong, it is normal to get the ripples. That's the whole reason for the elastic being smaller, but they need to be perpendicular to the cover stitch. If you're guiding too fast or too slow, then they're going to be diagonal like this way. I did pretty good on that one, so I had to improvise and do a little doodle there for you. Now, if you get those little diagonal dudes, it's okay. It's just me being a perfectionist and me trying to make you be a perfectionist. Remember, you can't just keep sewing off with a cover stitch machine. So I overlapped about 2 inches and then I took the threads out. And this is what it looks like. Now with this fabric, I don't have a lot of those ripples I talked about because it is a thicker fabric. On to step 6. This step will be binding with the attachment, and then step 7 is without it. And yes, this is how I attach my attachment to my binding machine. So if you do have this attachment, I do have a video on how to kind of assemble it because I had got it without it being assembled and I'm like, what are these little pieces? I don't know what to do with them. However, it is up to you where you put it on your machine so that it is sewing where it needs to sew. And something else I want to mention too. This could just be me, but anytime that I sew fabric that's on the thinner side, my binding attachment creates those ripples I was talking about. And of course they go away when you stretch it, but it just doesn't look professional to me. Anyways, that's just my PSA. Back to step 6. So you made a point at the end of your binding so that you can get it through your attachment. Trust me, it makes it easier. And then I jiggle it a little bit so that it goes in that little crevice. Once it's in place, you're going to move the fabric under the needle. And you want this fold right here. And then this one part gets stuck and I bring it down with my tweezers. This is what it will look like once it's all in place. Before you actually start sewing, do a couple stitches just to get the binding in place and then start sewing. I'm going to grab my tweezers and put the neck in that little crevice that I showed you earlier, and then pull the binding from the back just a little bit to get it started. Now, just like the elastic, the binding has to be smaller than the body of the leotard, which means weaving it through here is not going to be enough. We're going to have to pull it as we sew. Multitask. First, just pull it from the back a little bit, get it started, and then here we go. Slightly guide it through and just make sure that the fabric is going in the crevice. Meanwhile, you can see my right hand is pulling. As you get to the end, don't stop sewing. Don't stop sewing, don't stop sewing, don't stop sewing, sewing. You know what that is, right? It's the strap. Now you need to cut the binding where the neck is. And don't forget the other side. This is what the front looks like, and this is what the back looks like. Now you're going to continue to sew on the binding. I use my tweezers to put the right side of the neck in, and then I pull the back of the binding just to get it started, and then I keep sewing. Just like on the neck, you're going to guide with your left hand, and then you're going to pull the binding with your right hand. One thing you want to look out for is making sure that the needle is staying on the binding. If the attachment is too far to the right, then this will cause the needle to go off of the binding. Now it's time to do the other strap. We're almost finished, guys. We're almost finished. Honestly, this video is very long and I can't remember if I said it, but you do not want to pull with your right hand when doing the straps. I definitely guide it with my left hand, but nothing with my right hand. And then you take it out and cut the threads. And this is what it will look like when it's finished. It's not perfect, so I'm just gonna take it all out and redo it. Just kidding, I'm not gonna do that. April Fools! And then this is the inside. Look how pretty. Now the last part of the binding is to cut the straps the length that you need them. This measurement is provided in my pattern packet. However, you can physically measure your body to get the length that you need. Moving on to step 7, binding without the attachment. This is a good process if you don't have the attachment or if your fabric is just a little bit too thin for the attachment. The length and the width of the binding is the same. You're going to leave off a little bit for the strap, and then you're going to pin the binding to the neck. And that's really all where you need to pin it. You don't need to pin it the whole way. Whatever the strap measurement is, I usually leave a couple inches just for good measure. So, luckily, this step is optional. You don't have to serge it on first. It does make it slightly easier for the next step, but this isn't necessary. If you do decide to serge, make sure that you pick up the foot a little bit when you get close to the neck so that it doesn't make it all like wonky. All right, here's the meat and potatoes. You need to pull the binding as you're sewing. You're gonna have to find that happy medium. Not too much, not too little. You know, Little Red Riding Hood, just right. It's basically the same technique as the legs. You pull it, pinch it, and guide it. Pull it, pinch it, guide it. Pull it, pinch it, guide it. But I guess I don't really pinch it in this video, but if that helps you, you do that. And then once you get to the end where the neck is, you want to stop pulling because we're not pulling on the straps. Remember that. We are now finished with the serger and we're bringing out our home sewing machine. Make sure your settings are on a straight stretch stitch. Say that 5 times fast. I put the edge of my fabric on 1/4 of an inch, and then you start sewing where the neck begins. When you're sewing this part, you're going to smooth out the binding and slightly pull it, kind of like when we did the top stitching. And then you're going to back tack on the end of the neck. Now it's time to fold the binding over the edge. It should end up looking like this, and on the back side, it should be long enough so that the top stitching will catch it. If you need to, you can pin the binding all the way around. However, it is a step that could be skipped. You just need to pin by the neck. This is where you're going to fold over the binding to create the strap. This part can be a little fussy sometimes. I know it took me a couple tries because it kept wiggling around. You definitely want to pin the entire strap so that it doesn't come out of place. Now it's time to top stitch all the way around, which you can use your cover stitch or you can use your home sewing machine with a zigzag stitch. Slide the strap underneath the needle, then put the needle down. When you are sewing, you want to be mindful of catching the folded flap underneath. I like to keep my strap in between the first and the last hole of the conveyor belt. It's not called the conveyor belt, but that's just what I'm going to call it because I can't remember what it's called. Pull the back of the binding just to get it started and then continue sewing. And you know I've said it before, but make sure you take your pins out. Don't sew over your pins. Now, someone did mention putting elastic in the strap, which I do think can be a really good idea if it's needed. Now we're making our way to the binding. So the binding is folded over, it's in a good spot. You're going to slightly pull it towards you so that it's even and not all scrunched up, and then slightly guide it through. And now the last part of the step is to finish the strap. Look at us, we're almost done. We only have one more step left. So now, even though we did this a different way, it looks the same as the purple leotard. Now for step 8, we're going to attach the straps. Find the middle of your leotard. Mine has this tag, so I automatically know where the middle is. And you're going to put the straps on the inside, obviously, and then pin them down. The straps will be about 1 inch apart. They can be further, but you're gonna have to shorten the straps. Now it's time to sew them on with a straight stitch. I like to sew them at 2 places. The first place is close to the edge. I sew the first strap and then I actually keep going to the second strap. I don't pick up my needle, I don't cut my thread or anything like that. And then the second place that I sew is on the top stitching. That first line of top stitching is where I also sew the strap. And I do the same thing. I sew the strap, I keep sewing on to the second strap. And then of course you cut the threads. And then guys, guess what? We are finished. Now remember, I've been sewing for about 6 years, so I know I might make it look easy, but trust me, when I started, it was hard and my leotards did not look cute, okay? I mean, it's a learning experience. You just gotta keep at it, keep practicing, and stay consistent. I mean, look at me. I'm making a 15-minute video about how to make a leotard, and I didn't know anything about leotards.